Higher Universe Pictures.
Welcome to the Paranormal Phenomena Podcast with Brandon Randis and Elizabeth Chamberlain.
I'm Brandon Randis.
And I'm Elizabeth Chamberlain.
Welcome to the Paranormal Phenomena Podcast, where we talk about ghosts, aliens, and the unexplained. On today's episode, we welcome back paranormal expert Morgan Knudsen to talk about spiritualism. Is it fact or fraud? We also discuss Harry Houdini's association with it.
If you like our podcast, be sure to subscribe. And we'd love it if you could like, share, and comment on our show. Those likes go a long way in helping us reach a wider audience, and we really appreciate that.
Well, Morgan, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you on for the 7th, 8th, 9th, whatever time it is. It's always great to have you back.
Always happy to do it. I have so much fun with you guys. Like it's just a given. Like when you call, I'm like, yeah, of course I'm free. Like
always like I'm like, what guest should we have on next? And it's like, let's try Morgan again. Yeah, it's always a recipe for success.
Yeah, keep calling me. I love it.
So today we actually have a very interesting topic. We're going to discuss spiritualism. And it's not something that I know a lot about, other than what I've seen in movies and basic things I've read. So I'm kind of eager to hear your thoughts on it. So Elizabeth, if you want to launch into our first question.
Yeah, we just want to ask, start off very general and just ask, what is spiritualism and why did it seem to be so famous in the 19th century?
Oh my gosh. So it goes back years. And, I think it really took a hold during times of trauma, times of war, times of trauma, when people started to realize and start to think about, well, what is there? What is there outside of ourselves? What is going on? And I think part of what kicked in, unfortunately, what kicked into the spiritualism movement is also the realization that money could be made off of it. So I think there's a number of factors kind of that all came together at a certain time that sort of created the spiritualist movement and whatnot. And the Society of Psychical Research was developed in the late 1800s. It was actually started in order to start to settle down and debunk the crazy that was going on. The spiritualism of the late 19th century and in those time periods wasn't really the first movement per se. When we look back in history, all the way back to Babylon and Mesopotamia and places like that, you see these movements sort of happen throughout history, where it sort of comes up and then it dies away, and then it comes up and it dies away. And then when we get into sort of the spiritualism of that time period, people were really recording it at that point, and they were really writing this stuff down. They were really starting to, create sittings and the Victorian seances and everything we think about when we think about spiritualism and seances. So it's got a really, really long history, and I think a history that most people don't realize is there.
So how does it really differ? Because pretty much every religion has some sort of belief in the afterlife, and a lot of the religions make money too. They charge tithing or some sort of offering like that. So how does this differ from every other religion over the last thousands of years?
I think it became a little bit more about spirituality rather than about necessarily a doctrine. So when we think of religion, we think of something that we're committed to, that has scripture, that is a little bit more dogma related. Whereas spiritualism, I think it was a breakthrough. It was a break free, I think, of a lot of these heavy religions that were happening at the time period, and gave people permission to explore the paranormal, to explore the idea that they themselves were empowered to contact spirits. And what came with that, of course, was the side of people going into their own business, contacting spirits as well. It wasn't about going to an organization. It was about, I can create this business about contacting loved ones and things like that. So I think there was a number of differences, but I think the biggest one was the fact that it freed people of a lot of dogma and scripture.
You keep mentioning about the financial aspect of it. So people would exploit other people based on I think we've talked about that on our show before. How is that different than today?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think this came at a time period where it was framed in a new light. Where before a lot of that exploitation was coming from, as I say, organizations. It was coming from things like the churches, and stuff like that. I think where this began to take a turn was the fact that people began not only saying, okay, I'll cross your loved one over for this amount of money. I think the element of theater that was employed in order to create that was it escalated rapidly.
Hmm.
People sitting there and creating full studios where they would bring in an audience, and this audience would sit around the table, and there was a performance by somebody who considered themselves a medium or a channel or something like that. But the element, I think, of performance really drew people in on a level that other things hadn't before. And that's where, for me, like where spiritism at least can get really interesting. But it also started to murky the waters of these people who were able to do this for real, the mediums that had abilities and whatnot. When the Society of Psychical Research really started to get involved and say, we have to separate the good from the bad here, and figure out what is fake and what is not. I think it really put a lot on the line for some people that had these abilities. A lot of them would kind of dip into hiding a little bit, where maybe before they felt like they could speak out. But I think the theatrical aspect of this really got a lot of people's attention. And I mean, who wouldn't?
I wonder if it also had something to do with more modern technology. They started having film and recording devices, so it was a lot easier to trick people. Whereas 500 years earlier or more, they just didn't have that. Whereas now they got all these neat gadgets that could be used, and literally using smoke and mirrors to put on this performance of conjuring up a spirit.
Totally. I mean, we're talking about the dawning age of photography. We're talking about, the roots of special effects photography, for that matter. Things like double exposure, creating ectoplasm, creating all of these amazing effects. And that's what partly what I mean by the theatricality of it. Where there's a package that comes with a séance like this. It's not just somebody performing for you, but it's the whole thing. It's we've got photographic evidence now of something that happened. I mean, the people that were devious in creating some of this stuff, or and sometimes they were just doing it for entertainment. There was plenty of those too. But I think there was a package that you'd get with it, which was pretty cool. You went home with a souvenir almost.
Can you tell us about some efforts people have had to debunk spiritualism and seances, phony seances?
Yeah, and there's been so many, of course, starting with the Society of Psychical Research. There's been people that have made a career out of this. Of course, the probably most famous being Harry Houdini, and many people who have delved into trying to debunk and prove wrong these people who were charging money for these seances, these sittings. And the Society of Psychical Research, they got heavily involved in it, trying to make sure that people weren't getting scammed. Harry Houdini, when he got involved, I mean, he's of course world famous escape artist and performer. I think he got involved for a number of different reasons, but I think his reasons were a little bit more personal.
Such as?
Yeah, so this is crazy. So Houdini, when he was younger, actually lost a lot of friends. He lost a lot of people in his life. And one of the things that he had said with his friends at the time was, if you ever pass away, if somebody ever passes away, you got to come back and say hi.
Yeah.
And he kind of waited and waited and waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. And all of a sudden, from that point on, he really got on this bandwagon of it's all fake. This is all fake. Nothing happens. This is crap. So he turns now to these people who are mediums, whether they're real or not, and basically lumped everybody into one category and said these people are scam artists, period. There was no fine gray area, nothing. And he really spent a good chunk of his life trying to debunk these people, setting up seances, creating challenges for them, and really trying to just break open this pattern of spiritualism that became very popular. But it was interesting because he, for me, when I read about him and when I read about how he was kind of taking this stuff apart, there was an angry undertone to it. Like to me, it was a little bit more than just, okay, the guy's trying to save people from being scammed, which I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a little bit more underneath of that.
I was reading an article about James Randi the other day too, and he had that same thing where it seems like this was like his life's crusade. Why do you think they take it so? It's not like a hobby for them. It's like their life's mission to disprove this stuff. Why do you think they take it so seriously?
I think it varies per person, but I'll tell you the one thing that I've found that is that encompasses most people like this. And they're very frustrating to people in the scientific community, because the majority of the scientific community is very much pro parapsychology. I mean, Yale, Princeton, all these massive universities have these parapsychology labs, and they're going, "What are you doing?" So, I mean, a lot of their claims aren't even based in science themselves. They kind of have decided that this stuff is fake and that's it and whatever, and they're pushing it. They're pushing that agenda. But I think there's a couple of reasons why they do it, and I think one of the reason that I've noticed is the fact that that's people that are that skeptical, like almost militant skeptic, they struggle themselves with understanding the world in front of them. They get the physicality of that world. But when you talk to them about something that is a little more non-physical, when you get into a discussion, say, for example, on quantum theory, you get in like something that is now being highly regarded, like worked on all the time by labs all over the place. They struggle with that conversation just as much as they struggle with one about the paranormal. And usually when, this evidence and whatnot is placed in front of them, they get to the point where they can no longer argue it. And at that point, they just don't want to listen to you anymore. It's not a matter of, wait a minute, I need to change my mind. It's, you're now asking me to change a paradigm of the way I see the world. That's too much. I can't do it. So I think some of these people, it's a paradigm shift that they're struggling to make. I think the other side of that coin is the fact that when you get people who are, who, like Harry Houdini, lost people, and these people have passed over in their life, and they're putting this resistance into getting some information from them, getting a hello, a contact, anything. And when they keep observing the fact that it doesn't happen, usually creates the fact that it's not happening, which is a real catch-22 in this field. But I think what goes on is that, they become very bitter, they become very angry. And because they're not getting that result in their experience, they've got to point the finger and blame somebody. And that anger usually leads to just saying, you know what, it's not because of something I'm doing. Sometimes I think maybe they're, blaming themselves or whatever, but it can't be something that I'm doing. It's got to be the fact that this just isn't true. And it's easier to get your head around that sometimes than it is to turn around and look at ourselves and go, well, wait a minute, let's reevaluate things. So I think on both, in both senses, the paranormal in itself asks us to reevaluate the paradigms in our world, and not everybody's able to do that. Some people just are not ready, and it scares the hell out of them.
Yeah, I always found it so interesting about Harry Houdini, like, is so militant about it, because he himself is such a performer and an illusionist and all of that. But I think what always made sense to me was he was always upfront about that. He was like, this is an illusion, and I'm selling you this, theater, I'm selling you this performance. Whereas the phony seance situation was just like really tricking people, and it is just morally questionable, like really playing with people's grief and exploiting that for money. Super bad.
I agree. And I mean, and we still, of course, like you were saying, we still see it today,
Hmm.
where this is going on. So, I mean, this is definitely it's not a new phenomenon. It's not an old phenomenon. It's been going on for a really long time. And I agree with them. Like it really bugs me when I see, even some of the ghost hunting shows out there that are billing it as real when it is blatantly entertainment. I mean, a lot of this is entertainment. And but they're out there really really pushing that this is parapsychology. Well, hold on a minute, it's not. It's
Hmm.
different things. And that misdirection can end up leading, if you're not being upfront about it, it ends up leading to a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. It damages the reputation of people in the field that are serious. So I mean,
Hmm.
I totally get where he's coming from. Interestingly enough, this is really cool. Way back, Arthur Conan Doyle, he and Houdini were actually really good buddies for many many years. And Arthur Conan Doyle was he was on the other end of the spectrum. He was a spiritualist. He absolutely believed in the paranormal. He understood, he had a good grasp on it. And Houdini at one point said to him that the reason why he was able to do the tricks and do the performances that he was that he ended up hearing these voices. Like he felt he was in connection with, and I believe he said that they were voices that were independent of his own reason and judgment that told him what to do and how to do it. And Arthur Conan Doyle he was like, what? What did you just say? Like, what in the world? And and of course, most performers know this connection. We know this connection. I mean, inherently, it is a connection to something greater than ourselves. I've experienced it myself. And so it's interesting to me, and this is why I lean to the perspective with Houdini, that this was really about his own upset and frustration and anger rather than about his own belief in what was going on. I think he kind of lumped stuff together and really didn't take the time, or maybe he did, but he wouldn't admit it, to actually take a step back and say, hold on a minute, something is, there is something here. But unfortunately, his reaction was anger, and I think he probably shut out a lot of opportunity to learn about himself and why he was able to do what he did, by just junking this all into one big bin and saying it's all crap.
Well, I guess a logical question would be, if he was so adamant that this is all bullshit, basically, why would he made a deal with a buddy of his or something, a guy named Bess, that whoever died
Yeah.
first, they would come back and reveal themselves from the ghost world? Was that just kind of a sarcasm on his part, or was that something
Yeah,
he actually
I was wondering the same thing. I was like, Bess, I think, is Beatrice, his wife, actually. Yeah, and same thing. I was just like, do you actually, was it like one final thing to disprove everything, or was it like you were actually still curious and you wanted to experience it yourself? They say, what was the saying? They say it's like, if anybody could escape the afterlife, it would be Houdini. I love that.
Yeah, and I think with him, I kind of wonder if he really was looking for answers for himself, because
Hmm.
you mentioned a few minutes ago this concept that he had, that he said, what something helps me through my performances, I'm connected to something else. And I kind of wonder if some of this had to do with that. And because a lot of people during this time period too, were very afraid to come out and say, look, something happened, like there's something else there. They were afraid to ruin their reputation, and whatnot. So I kind of wonder a little bit whether that might have been an issue for him as well. Here he is sort of fighting with his own understanding of what's going on with the world and whatnot. He's having these other friends pass away that aren't, I think, in his mind, coming forward. I don't know what he was looking for per se as a message, but here he's perceiving that they're not coming and visiting. And so I wonder how well he dealt with the concepts of spirit within himself, how well he dealt with the deaths of those friends, and how that process went for him. And I don't know enough about him to really take a guess. but the anger that he puts forward as just as somebody who is so vehemently against, everything paranormal, as an artist, it's a very odd position to take.
So going back to these, the early days of this in the 19th century, like what are some of the methods these people use to fool people? Like how could you actually trick someone into showing them a spirit coming out of the table or whatever they did?
Oh gosh, there was so many that were used at the time. You were mentioning photography, of course, was a massive tool for these people. But darkness was one of the things I think that they really prided themselves on the most, and got away with so much because the seances were more often than not held in complete dark. So it was very easy to set the stage. Everything from being able to, ring a box with a bell on it, from underneath a chair, having controls under a table, even just the basic ability to drape a tablecloth over a table, was used to conceal all sorts of crazy things. So there's been plenty of things over the years. One of my favorites, which is a simple trick, but it's been used many times in seances and whatnot as well, is having a bag of bells, and all of the little balls inside the bells are removed. But when, of course, you shake this bag of bells, they all jingle. And you then turn around, you put them, you lay them out on the table, you build it up with a story. You lay these bells out on the table and then say, you know what, if there's a message for you, then you can come pick up a bell and the bell won't ring. And you turn around, of course, somebody will lean in and pick up the bell and it doesn't ring, right? And it blows people's minds. And it's become a very popular magic trick even today. It's something that's used. So there's plenty of things that people would try. One of the things Houdini would implement during these seances is he would actually make the medium sit in a box, or like half a box with walls on it, so that she couldn't get out or influence or lean over or or anything to pick things up or to put things down, or so it limited a lot of these people. There was a medium that he really went after to try to debunk by the name of Mina Crandon. And he really went all out for her. He had decided he was going to sit in on these seances. And she ended up accepting a challenge by the magazine Scientific American. And she, of course, she was famous for the whole gambit of tricks and whatnot. And the magazine basically offered a prize of $2,500 and said, you know what, if you can prove to our committee, which included Houdini, that you can, you have these abilities, then you get your $2,500. So she accepted. And what and Houdini had her kind of sit in one of these boxes so that she couldn't manipulate anything. And one of the things that they would have back in that time period is they would have an electric bell which would sit in a box, which was called a bell box. And they had a number of different ways of being able to activate this box and ring this bell from any direction. And what she ended up doing, or what he discovered she was doing, was she actually was triggering this electric bell box with this ruler like under her feet. And he called it out and said, look, like this is how you're doing it. What was interesting was that she came back and said, hell no, I didn't do that. You set that up before I even got started. I didn't set this up. That's not how that bell works. So she ended up coming back at him really, really hard. So it's interesting. And there was a great big battle about it. There was another sitting where he attributed this table levitation, because table levitation was a big deal back then, as well. Anything from table tipping, which is putting your fingers on the side of the table, almost like a Ouija board planchette, and the table rocking back and forth to answer questions. Sometimes it would even be people sort of putting lightly their fingertips under the table and the table would rise, stuff like that. And he ended up concluding that there was some sort of head movement or something like that she was actually using to move this table. It was really elaborate. And again, called her out on it, and she absolutely vehemently denied it. So it's interesting. Like, I think it was one of the first mediums that came back and actually went to bat for herself.
I just really want to know what your opinion is on the spiritualism side of things, on why Houdini's seance has never worked.
I think there's a number of reasons why his seances never worked, and we can actually take a look at something called the Philip experiment in Ontario to begin to examine and break that down, because their experiment, which was done by the Society of Psychical Research in Canada and Mensa, they had it work, and it was scientifically tested. They repeated the experiment twice, and they had the damn thing work. So here's what they did. So they ended up with a group of people. They had a different concept, because their concept was, we want to create an entity, create a consciousness from nothing. We don't want to contact a spirit. We want to create a consciousness from absolutely nothing. And what they did was they took a pen and paper and they wrote a character, and they called this character Philip. And they made him a historical figure. He was a womanizer. There was a whole backstory to this guy. And they talked about him for a long enough period of time that they convinced themselves that this guy was real, so that they could come into the seance feeling like this guy's legit. And they sat down and they decided they were going to do it exactly like the Victorian days. And they sat around and they were using everything from Ouija to table tipping to all of this kind of thing. Asking, are you there? Can we talk to somebody? Where's Philip? And for the longest time, they didn't get any response at all. It was like a year. They met multiple times a week for like a year, couldn't get anything. And then when they looked back at the seances during those Victorian periods, they realized that the one thing that they were missing was having fun. Because every time that a Victorian seance would happen, people were there to hang out. It was a social thing. It was fun. People were laughing. They were having drinks. They were like, it was a really fun time. It was an evening activity, like you'd go to the movies. And so they started to do that. They came in, had snacks, joked around, had some fun, became playful with it. And lo and behold, stuff started happening. There was movement on the table. They had furniture that was moving around. They had basically poltergeist activity. They would even get replies from this disincarnate energy to questions. So, somebody would say hello, and they would hear knocking right in front of that person on the table. It would respond to its name, all sorts of things. They repeated this experiment with another group. They created another character called Lilith and got the same results. And so it was interesting to break that experiment down, go back and look at what Houdini was doing. And when you realize, I think, the energy that he was bringing in to that space, that complete disbelief, it's, this isn't real, this can't happen, I'm pissed off, I'm angry. It's a complete opposing energy of getting these things to work when they were working in a genuine fashion. So I think it comes down to his approach, his intention, and the energy that he was bringing in. It wasn't conducive to the activity happening.
And do you think that maybe he kind of carried that energy into the afterlife, and that's why Beatrice was never able to contact him?
Well, I think for him, and Beatrice, if they shared a very, very similar belief system, it's a problem, because when you've got, it's not so much the person who moves over isn't aware, it's the person that's still there that it has the obligation to line up with who that person now, who they really are, which is pure positive energy. So if somebody is coming into it and going, you know what, I really don't think I'm going to get a response. Oh, well, I'm going to try anyway. Nothing ever works out for me. This doesn't happen for me. If they've got a lineup of beliefs like that, they're going to manifest exactly what they're talking about. So, if they've got that maundation, they're kind of screwed from the get-go. Unless you start to reshape your paradigm about this stuff. And we can look at things like the Gansfeld experiments and whatnot as proof of this, because people who are more open, more outgoing, more willing to receive this type of information, people who are, you know, a little are happy, you know, all of these different things, they are just statistically more likely to have this stuff go on for them. So if you've got any of those that are out of whack, you know, you're kind of you're up the creek without a paddle. You know?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Huh. Well,
So,
I wonder. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I have another question about the Houdini seance situation. I wonder. A year after Houdini passed away, because they do the annual seances and whatnot. A year after Houdini died, they did a seance, and that was the one where he was supposed to come back. You know, the first time. And I remember that they had bells, and they had, you know, things set up that that Houdini was supposed to ring and supposed to do from the afterlife, and none of that happened. But I hear that it rained, and then there was like a thunderstorm or something. But it was, I don't know, there was some sort of like weird weather going on, and people said if Houdini came back from the afterlife, he wouldn't have done it by ringing a bell. He would do it by, you know, like they were trying to make it seem like it actually had worked. I don't know. I want to know what your thoughts are on that.
yeah, you know, it's funny because you know, my first inkling when I hear about that is the paranormal never happens when you want it to.
Mm.
It doesn't. And it's so, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they, you know, they say, oh, you know, this is going to be the day, you know, I'm going to go in, I'm going to get these responses and whatever. I mean, I'll tell you straight up, like half the time, you're not going to get absolutely anything. You know, it's a frustrating field at times. So, you know, I don't know. I don't, you know, I don't know why nothing went on per se, but because I think we all have to take a hard look at the what was going on with the actual seance and stuff like that itself anyway. But this stuff just never happens when you expect it to. It really doesn't. And you know, sometimes when we're asking, and this is kind of the catch-22 with the paranormal, is that when you're asking for something and you want it to happen so bad, your attention ends up on the fact that you don't have it yet. And it becomes a real catch-22 because the way this stuff shows up often is within this kind of state of expectation, knowing this is going to happen. And when we're expecting something, we're always putting that thing, whatever it is, in the future because we're expecting that thing to go on. Well, it's going to go on, which means it hasn't gone on yet. So it can be a bit of a problem when you're trying to manifest something and you keep looking at the fact that it is just not there. So and with this stuff is exactly the same. The harder you try, the worse it gets. And when we look at the Philip experiment, it's a perfect example of that. You know, the harder they tried, the harder they focused, the less they got. And it was as soon as they let go, as soon as they were able to just, you know what, let's just have fun and show up and allow this stuff to happen, within 24, 48 hours, they had stuff going on. So it's, and we see it in investigations. I had a case years ago, which was, and it's happened a number of times, but it was so funny. We were out at an old mission. It was an old Catholic mission. And I remember Steph and I, we were sitting, we had a team with us because it was a large place. And I remember them all being so serious. And both of us just laughed because we said, don't bother. If you are going to sit around with an EVP recorder, let me tell you, if you are serious, you ain't going to get nothing. And so Steph and I, we just started yucking it up for the evening. And we sat there and we laughed and we ate, we did whatever. And lo and behold, we started to get messages on the recorder. But yeah, it's always the way it goes.
Okay, we only got a few minutes left here. So I guess the final question would be, well, what is the state of spiritualism today? Has it all been debunked and no one pursues it? I think it still exists in some form, but what's it like these days?
Well, I think it's moved from this concept of spiritualism into the world of science. You know, the stuff that we thought at one point, you know, shouldn't be happening or couldn't be happening or whatever, has now morphed into studies that are being done on a daily basis about communication and you know, contacting other spirits and other intelligences and stuff like that. I think we've moved past this being a novelty, at least on the scientific level, and they've realized that it's like, no, hang on a minute, there's more to that. My great-great-grandfather Albert Durant Watson, of course, he's one of the most famous of our time, of that time, in Canada. And I mean, here he was, a physician who really put his whole career on the line for a channel by the name of Louis Benjamin, and came forward and really risked his career and said, you know what, this is the real deal. And I think the more that people like him came forward and said, you know what, it's not all crap, it's not all entertainment, there's something else. And as that spiritism movement, I think, slowly transformed into serious people doing serious research, and now we've got universities that are taking it seriously, so it's a good thing.
Wow.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for sharing your insight. That was a very interesting conversation.
That was
Yeah.
super interesting. I love it.
I feel like I'm getting like free education. Like I'm like, okay, I'm gonna sit here, listen to her lecture. Like, this is so nice. And I'm the only me and Brandon are the only students, so we get to ask whatever questions we want. It's really nice. Thank you so much.
I love it. It's my pleasure. I love doing this, so it's great.
Awesome. Well, we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Paranormal Phenomena Podcast. See you next time.